Let's move into a chapter that follows AI deeper into its life cycle, focusing on the policies that govern how models are developed, deployed, and how we handle the risks that come from third parties. This is where governance meets the real machinery of building and running AI. Here's what we'll cover together. We'll start with development, looking at the standards, training and validation, testing, and documentation that should surround building a model responsibly. Then, we'll follow the system into deployment, examining readiness criteria, continuous monitoring, incident response, and reporting obligations, because launching is just the beginning, not the end. After that, we'll widen the lens to existing policies and how to adapt them for AI, along with AI-specific privacy and security controls. And finally, we'll tackle a hugely important and growing area, third-party and supply chain risk, including procurement, acceptable use, and vendor contracts, because so much AI today comes from outside the organization. Here's how I'd frame this chapter. If the last one was about the front-end checks, this one is about controlling AI as it's actually built, launched, and sourced from others. As we go, keep asking, what policy keeps this stage under control? Let's dive in. Let's begin with the foundation of building AI responsibly: development standards and best practices. These are the agreed ways of working that keep model building disciplined rather than chaotic. Here's the idea. Development standards are the rules and guidelines a team follows when building an AI model, covering how they code, document, test, and make decisions. Best practices are the proven approaches the wider field has learned to rely on. Together, they ensure quality and consistency. Why do we need these for AI specifically? Let me explain. Building AI well is genuinely hard, and without standards, every team improvises, leading to inconsistent quality and hidden risks. Think about how chaotic it would be if every engineer documented their work however they felt that day, some thoroughly, some not at all. Standards bring order. Let me give you an example. Imagine a team with clear development standards. They follow consistent practices for handling data, testing for bias at defined stages, and documenting every key decision. Now compare that to a team with no standards, where one person tests carefully and another skips it entirely. Which team produces governable AI? Clearly the first. Here's an important point. Standards aren't about bureaucracy for its own sake. They're about making good practices reliable and repeatable. So responsible behavior doesn't depend on individual heroics. Here's the governance lesson. Development standards and best practices are how responsible AI becomes the default way of working, not an occasional effort. As a professional, encourage their adoption and check that they're actually followed. Ask, does this team have clear standards and do they stick to them? Because consistent, disciplined development is the soil in which trustworthy AI grows. Skip it, and quality becomes a gamble. Let's look at two core activities in building any AI model: training and validation. Understanding these helps you grasp how a model actually becomes capable and where governance fits in. Let's start with training. This is the process where the model learns from data, adjusting itself to recognize patterns and make predictions. It's the heart of how machine learning models gain their abilities. But here's the crucial companion: validation. Validation is how you check whether the model actually learned well and performs correctly on data it hasn't seen before. Let me explain why validation is so important with an analogy. Imagine a student who memorizes the exact answers to practice questions but never truly understands the subject. They'll ace those specific questions and fail the real exam. AI can do the same thing. It can memorize the training data without really learning to generalize. Validation is how we catch that, by testing it on fresh data, like a real exam. Here's the governance angle. Proper training and validation procedures ensure the model is genuinely capable, not just falsely impressive. Imagine a company that trains a model and validates it carefully on separate data, discovering it actually performs poorly in realistic conditions. That discovery, before deployment, prevents real-world harm. Without proper validation, they'd have shipped a flawed system, confident it was fine. Here's a key term you'll encounter: overfitting, which is exactly that memorization problem, where a model fits the training data too closely and fails on new data. Good validation procedures are how you detect it. Here's the lesson. Training builds the model, validation proves whether it actually works. As a professional, always ask, was this model validated properly on data it didn't train on? Because a model that looks great on its training data but fails in reality is a hidden danger. Rigorous validation is how governance ensures the model's competence is real, not illusory. Let's get into the rigorous checking that responsible AI demands. Testing protocols, covering bias, performance, and security. This is where we deliberately probe a model for problems before it can cause harm. Here's the idea. Testing protocols are structured procedures for examining an AI system across multiple dimensions to confirm it behaves as intended and is safe to use. Notice the three areas highlighted: bias, performance, and security, because each addresses a different kind of risk. Let me walk through them. Bias testing checks whether the model treats different groups unfairly, the fairness concern we keep returning to. Performance testing checks whether it's actually accurate and effective at its job. And security testing checks whether it can withstand attacks or manipulation. See how these map directly to the harms we've discussed. Let me give you a vivid example. Imagine an AI used in hiring. Performance testing confirms it predicts good candidates accurately. Bias testing checks it doesn't favor one demographic unfairly. Security testing ensures no one can trick it into bad decisions. Skip any one of these and you've left a serious gap. An accurate but biased tool, or a fair but easily hacked one. Here's why structured protocols matter rather than casual checking. Without a defined protocol, teams tend to test only what they happen to think of, often just performance, while ignoring bias and security entirely. Protocols force comprehensive testing across all the dimensions that matter. Here's the governance lesson. Testing protocols are how we deliberately hunt for problems before deployment across the full range of risks. As a professional, always ask, has this system been tested for bias, performance, and security, not just one of them? Because a model that passes only on accuracy can still be dangerously unfair or insecure. Thorough, multidimensional testing is one of governance's most powerful tools for catching harm before it reaches real people. Let's talk about something that may sound dull, but is genuinely one of the pillars of AI governance: model documentation. Stay with me, because good documentation can be the difference between a governable system and an unaccountable one. Here's the idea. Model documentation is the recorded information about an AI system: what it does, how it was built, what data it used, how it was tested, its limitations, and the key decisions made along the way. It's the written memory of the model. Why does this matter so much? Let me put it bluntly. If it isn't documented, it might as well not have happened, at least from a governance perspective. Imagine trying to prove your AI was tested for bias or explain why it makes certain decisions with no records at all. You'd be helpless. Let me give you a real scenario. Suppose a regulator investigates a company's AI system, or someone harmed by it demands an explanation. The company with thorough documentation can show how the system was built, what data was used, how it was tested, and what its known limitations are. The company without documentation? They look careless at best, negligent at worst, and they can't defend themselves. Here's another angle. Documentation isn't just for outsiders. It's for the team itself. People leave, memories fade, and without records, the organization loses understanding of its own systems. Good documentation preserves that knowledge. Here's the governance lesson. Documentation is what makes accountability and transparency actually possible. It's the evidence that responsible practices were followed and the reference that lets others understand and audit the system. As a professional, always ask, is this system properly documented? Because documentation transforms claims into proof. A well-documented model can be explained, audited, and defended, while an undocumented one is a black box in every sense, even to the people who built it. Let's reach a pivotal moment in the AI lifecycle, deciding whether a system is actually ready to deploy. governed by deployment readiness criteria. This is a checkpoint that deserves real respect. Here's the concept. Deployment readiness criteria are the specific conditions an AI system must meet before it's allowed to go live in the real world. Think of them as the checklist that answers, is this truly ready for real people and real consequences? Why is this such a critical gate? Let me draw an analogy. Think of an aircraft before takeoff. There's a pre-flight checklist, and the plane doesn't fly until every item passes. You wouldn't want pilots skipping that just because they're eager to depart. Deployment readiness criteria are the pre-flight checklist for AI. Let me give you an example of what those criteria might include. Has the model been validated and tested for bias, performance, and security? Is it properly documented? Have the necessary approvals been obtained? Are monitoring and incident plans in place? Only when these are satisfied should the system launch. Here's a danger I want you to recognize. The pressure to deploy is often intense. Business stakeholders are eager, deadlines loom. That pressure can tempt teams to skip steps. Readiness criteria exist precisely to resist that pressure, ensuring the system meets a defined bar regardless of how badly people want to ship it. Imagine a system rushed live without meeting its criteria, then causing harm that proper checks would have caught. Avoidable and yet common. Here's the governance lesson. Deployment readiness criteria turn "are we ready" from a gut feeling into a defined, defensible decision. As a professional, champion these criteria and hold the line on them. Let's tackle something that's easy to neglect but absolutely essential. Continuous monitoring of AI after it's deployed. Because here's a truth many people miss. Launching an AI system is the start of its life, not the finish line. Here's the idea. Continuous monitoring means keeping a constant watch on a deployed AI system, tracking how it performs, whether it's behaving as expected, and whether new problems emerge over time. It's ongoing vigilance, not a one-time check. Why is this so necessary for AI specifically? Let me explain something distinctive about these systems. Unlike traditional software, AI can degrade over time even if nothing in the code changes. Why? Because the world changes. The data the model encounters in reality can drift away from what it was trained on, and its performance quietly slips. Let me give you an example. Imagine an AI trained to detect fraud based on past patterns. Over time, fraudsters change their tactics, and the world the model learnt no longer matches reality. Without monitoring, the system keeps running, growing steadily less effective while everyone assumes it's fine. That gap between assumed and actual performance is exactly what monitoring catches. Have you ever set something up perfectly, then assumed it would stay perfect forever? With AI, that assumption is dangerous. Here's another reason. Monitoring catches problems you couldn't predict before launch, unexpected behaviors that only surface with real users in real conditions. Here's the governance lesson. Continuous monitoring is how we catch the problems that emerge only after deployment, including the slow drift that would otherwise go unnoticed. Let's talk about preparing for when things go wrong, because with AI, it's not a question of if, but when. Incident response procedures. Having these ready is a hallmark of mature governance. Here's the idea. Incident response procedures are the predefined plans for what to do when an AI system causes a problem, an error, a harmful outcome, a security breach, or any serious malfunction. They answer the question, when something goes wrong, how do we react quickly and effectively? Why prepare these in advance? Let me use an analogy. Think of a fire drill. You don't figure out how to evacuate while the building is burning. You plan it beforehand so that in the chaos of a real emergency, everyone knows exactly what to do. Incident response procedures are the fire drill for AI problems. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine an AI system suddenly starts making seriously flawed decisions affecting customers. Without a plan, panic sets in. No one knows who's in charge, how to stop the system, who to notify, or how to fix it. Precious time is lost while harm continues. Now imagine a company with clear procedures. They quickly identify the issue, know who's responsible, can pause the system, notify the right people, and begin remediation. Same crisis, vastly different outcome. So, what do good procedures cover? Typically, how to detect and report an incident, who's responsible for responding, how to contain the harm, how to communicate, and how to investigate and fix the root cause. Here's the governance lesson. Incident response procedures turn a potential disaster into a managed event. They ensure the organization reacts swiftly and responsibly rather than scrambling in confusion. Let's look at the formal duties around recording and communicating information about AI systems, documentation and reporting obligations. These often carry legal weight, so they deserve careful attention. Here's the idea. We discussed documentation earlier as good practice, but here we focus on obligations. The documentation and reporting that an organization is required to maintain and provide, often by law or regulation. It's not just helpful, it's mandatory. Let me clarify the two parts. Documentation obligations require keeping certain records about the AI system. Reporting obligations require actively communicating certain information to regulators, to affected people, or to other parties, sometimes on a schedule or when specific events occur. Why do these obligations exist? Let me explain. As AI regulation grows, laws increasingly demand proof that organizations are managing AI responsibly. The EU AI Act, for instance, requires extensive documentation for high-risk systems and certain reporting when things go wrong. These obligations make accountability enforceable. Let me give you an example. Imagine a company operating a high-risk AI system under such a law. They may be obligated to maintain detailed technical documentation, keep logs of the system's operation, and report serious incidents to authorities within a set time frame. These aren't optional niceties, they're legal duties with penalties for failure. Here's an important point. Reporting obligations often have strict timelines. Failing to report a serious incident promptly can itself be a violation, separate from the incident. So, organizations must know not just what to report, but when. Here's the governance lesson. Documentation and reporting obligations are how regulators ensure organizations stay accountable and transparent about their AI. Meeting them is both a legal necessity and a demonstration of good faith. Let's explore a smart, practical step many organizations overlook, checking whether their existing policies already apply to AI. Because here's a key insight, you often don't need to start from scratch. Here's the idea. Organizations already have many policies on data, security, procurement, ethics, and more. Evaluating existing policies for AI applicability means reviewing those policies to see which ones already cover AI, which need updating, and where genuine gaps exist that require new policies. Why is this such a wise approach? Let me explain. There's a temptation when AI arrives to assume everything must be built fresh. But that's wasteful and can create confusion with overlapping rules. Many existing policies already address relevant concerns. They just may need a careful look and some adaptation for AI's unique aspects. Let me give you an example. A company already has a data privacy policy. Does it cover the way AI uses data? Partly perhaps. But AI raises new issues like inference and large-scale training that the old policy never anticipated. So rather than discarding it, you evaluate it, keep what works, and update what doesn't. Here's another scenario. An organization has a procurement policy for buying software. When they start buying AI tools, does that policy address AI-specific risks like bias or model transparency? Probably not fully. So you identify that gap and extend the policy. Here's the governance insight. This evaluation prevents two mistakes: reinventing the wheel unnecessarily and assuming old policies fully cover new AI risks when they don't. It's about building on what exists while honestly identifying what's missing. Let's deepen our understanding of privacy in the AI context, looking at the considerations that are genuinely specific to AI beyond traditional privacy concerns. Because AI introduces privacy challenges that older thinking simply didn't anticipate. Here's the framing. Traditional privacy focuses on collecting, storing, and using personal data appropriately. AI keeps all of that but adds new wrinkles that deserve special attention. Let me walk you through the most important ones. First, there's inference. AI can deduce sensitive information you never directly provided. Remember the example of a system guessing someone's health condition from shopping habits? That's an AI-specific privacy risk, harm from data the person never actually shared. Second, there's the training data problem. Personal data absorbed into a model during training can be hard to fully remove later. If someone exercises their right to be forgotten, how do you erase their influence from a model that already learned from them? That's a genuinely thorny AI-specific challenge. Third, there's data hunger. AI's appetite for large data sets can push organizations to collect more personal data than they really need, straining the principle of data minimization. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine an AI system that, through patterns, can identify individuals even from supposedly anonymized data. Traditional privacy assumed anonymization was a solid protection, but AI's pattern finding power can sometimes undo it. That's a risk old frameworks didn't foresee. Here's the governance lesson. AI-specific privacy considerations mean you can't just apply old privacy thinking unchanged. You have to account for inference, the difficulty of deletion from models, data hunger, and re-identification risks. Let's focus on protecting AI systems from threats through security controls designed for AI's unique vulnerabilities. Because AI faces some attacks that traditional systems never did. Here's the idea. Security controls for AI are the safeguards that protect AI systems from malicious attacks, unauthorized access, and tampering. Many are familiar security measures, but AI also faces distinctive threats that require special controls. Let me highlight some AI-specific threats so you understand what we're defending against. There's adversarial input, where an attacker deliberately crafts inputs to fool the model into making wrong decisions. Imagine someone subtly altering an image so an AI misclassifies it while a human sees nothing wrong. There's also data poisoning, where attackers corrupt the training data to sabotage the model from the inside. And there's model theft or extraction, where someone tries to steal the model itself or the sensitive data within it. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine an AI system used for security screening. An attacker who understands its weaknesses might craft inputs designed to slip past it undetected. Defending against that requires controls specifically aimed at adversarial manipulation, not just traditional firewalls. So what do AI security controls include? Things like protecting training data integrity, testing the model against adversarial attacks, controlling access to the model, and monitoring for unusual behavior that might signal an attack. Here's the governance lesson. AI security controls must address both the usual cybersecurity concerns and these novel AI-specific attack vectors. Traditional security alone isn't enough because AI can be attacked in ways traditional software cannot. As a professional, always ask, is this AI system protected against the specific ways AI can be attacked, not just general threats? Let's turn to a reality of modern AI that's easy to underestimate. The fact that organizations often buy or source AI from others, which brings us to procurement and supply chain governance. Here's the situation. Most organizations don't build all their AI from scratch. They buy AI tools, use models from vendors, and rely on components from a whole chain of suppliers. Procurement and supply chain governance is about managing the risks that come with acquiring AI from outside. Why does this deserve serious attention? Let me explain with a key insight. When you buy AI from someone else, you inherit risks you didn't create and may not even see. The vendor made choices about data, training, and testing that you weren't part of, yet you bear the consequences when you deploy it. Let me give you an example. Imagine a company that buys an AI hiring tool from a vendor. They didn't build it, but if it turns out to be biased, the company using it faces the legal and reputational fallout. Remember our value chain discussion? The deployer carries real responsibility. So they can't just trust the vendor blindly. They need governance over what they procure. Here's another angle. The supply chain can be deep. The AI you buy might itself rely on other models and data sources, each adding risk. Do you actually know what's inside the AI you're purchasing? Many organizations don't, and that's the problem. So good procurement governance asks hard questions before buying. How was this built and tested? What data was used? What are its limitations? What does the vendor guarantee? Here's the governance lesson. Procurement and supply chain governance ensures you scrutinize AI you acquire as carefully as AI you build, because the risks come along with it either way. Let's look at a practical tool for keeping AI use within safe and appropriate bounds: the Acceptable Use Policy Framework. This is about defining clearly what AI may and may not be used for. Here's the idea. An acceptable use policy, often called an AUP, sets out the rules for how AI systems and tools can be used within an organization: what's permitted, what's prohibited, and what conditions apply. It's the rule book for users. Why is this needed? Let me explain with the reality of modern workplaces. AI tools are now widely available, and employees may start using them in all sorts of ways, some helpful, some risky, some genuinely dangerous. Without clear guidance, people improvise, and that's where problems start. Let me give you a vivid example. Imagine an employee pasting confidential company information into a public AI chat tool to get help with a task. They mean well, but they may have just leaked sensitive data to an outside system. An acceptable use policy would clearly state that this isn't allowed, preventing the mistake before it happens. Have you considered how easily well-intentioned people can misuse a powerful tool without clear rules? That's exactly the gap an AUP fills. So what does a good acceptable use framework cover? Typically, which AI tools are approved, what data can and cannot be entered into them, what uses are prohibited, and the responsibilities of users. It translates broad governance principles into concrete do's and don'ts that ordinary people can follow. Here's the governance lesson. An acceptable use policy framework is how you guide everyday AI use across the organization, preventing both careless mistakes and deliberate misuse. It connects back to user responsibility and role-specific training, giving people clear boundaries. As a professional, always ask, do the people using AI here have clear rules about what's acceptable? Let's close this chapter by going deeper into managing the risks that come from outside parties through third-party risk assessment and contracts. This builds on our procurement discussion and is increasingly central to AI governance. Here's the idea. When an organization relies on third parties for AI, vendors, providers, partners, it needs to assess the risks those parties bring and use contracts to manage them. Risk assessment is about understanding the danger, and contracts are about pinning down responsibilities and protections in writing. Let me explain why both pieces matter. Assessing third-party risk means actually evaluating the vendor and their AI. How trustworthy are they? How was the system built? What could go wrong? But assessment alone isn't enough. You also need contracts that clearly define obligations. Who's responsible if the AI causes harm? What the vendor guarantees? How data will be handled? And what happens when problems arise? Let me give you a scenario. Imagine a company adopting an AI service from a vendor. A proper third-party risk assessment examines the vendor's practices, the system's testing, and its limitations. Then, the contract locks in commitments. The vendor must meet certain standards, handle data appropriately, support incident response, and accept defined liability. Now imagine skipping the contract and just trusting a handshake. When something goes wrong, who's responsible? Without clear terms, the answer is a costly, finger-pointing mess. Here's an important point. Contracts are where responsibility gets allocated in the AI value chain. Remember how developers, providers, and deployers each carry obligations? Contracts are often where those obligations are formally divided and enforced between parties. Here's the closing governance lesson. Third-party risk assessment tells you what dangers you're taking on, and contracts give you the legal tools to manage them and assign responsibility. Together, they protect the organization when it depends on others for AI.